he called fasting the physician within, which I think is a powerful, eloquent summary of like all the cool studies that are substantiating that now, is that they didn't have randomized controlled trials thousands of years ago, but they saw anecdotally people getting better and healthier.
Our guest today is Dr. Will Cole, and he's a leading functional medicine expert who consults with people all around the world in his clinical practice, and he specializes in clinically investigating the underlying factors in chronic disease and in customizing health programs. Dr. Cole has been named one of the top 50 functional medicine and integrative doctors in the nation and is the host of the Art of Wellbeing podcast. And he's been featured everywhere from Forbes to Parade to Shape to Mind Body Green and so much more. And he's the author of the best-selling books Ketotarian, The Inflammation Spectrum, and his new book, Intuitive Fasting. So let's jump into this conversation with the incredible Dr. Will Cole. This is one thing that I want to know more about for sure, which is your superhero origin story, man. You know, being from Pittsburgh, how did you first kind of fall in love with health and wellness?
So my dad was a bodybuilder in the 80s and 90s. So I thought it was normal to have your dad like lubed up in baby oil with like turquoise Speedos and like at the competitions. And my mom, I remember her with those big 80s camcorders filming him, like getting the poses right. And so that was, not everybody in the bodybuilding world, of course, is interested in wellness. My dad just happened to be interested in both. So my early formative years was going through the co-op and buying the healthy foods and seeing that juxtaposition of my friends at school. Yeah. And it was something that was just very normal for me, but we didn't like look down on people that didn't eat like us. It just was different. Right. And then that evolved to me being really interested in it for myself. It wasn't just something we did at home. So I worked at Finish Line at the mall in Pittsburgh.
Shout out to our kicks right now too.
Got my Yeezys on. But I used to spend my paychecks working like part-time at Finish Line, going to the health food store, buying these cool things at like 16 years old, 17 years old, like a sophomore, junior, senior in high school. So it was just like, there wasn't a term called biohacker at that time, but it was like my version of that, of me wanting to feel good and understand how food could be medicine and understand how food could improve my health. I didn't look at labs. I didn't look at all the studies at that point. It just was an intuitive thing for me. And I read a book at that same time called Patient Heal Thyself from Jordan Rubin. I don't know if you know Jordan Rubin. Yeah. So he talked about how he reversed his Crohn's disease, his ulcerative colitis, his inflammatory bowel issues with food and fasting. So that was an early turning point for me too. And then I got trained in it formally and haven't looked back since. And we started one of the first telehealth clinics. My whole career has been telehealth because I am in Pittsburgh. So I moved back from LA back home. And then we started our telehealth clinic just because I'd be writing about this or speaking about this. And functional medicine wasn't as well known as it is today.
Yeah, and I was wondering how you were working with folks like, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow, who wrote the foreword for your book, and obviously, you know, being a pioneer really in telemedicine, and so much that we can do now with getting labs done and all that stuff.
Yeah, doctors had to learn overnight because they were forced to with the pandemic. For me, it wasn't like a calculated thing other than there'd be people in different states and countries that needed access to this. So we provided it, and it was just born out of them needing it.
So what was it that, I mean, it seems like it was kind of a natural transition, but what was it that specifically attracted you to functional medicine?
Well, health and wellness I knew I wanted to be in health and wellness, but when I was in school, it was at Southern California University of Health Sciences in Whittier, not too far from here. And there was a guy who'd gone to my school. He was older than I was. His name was Datis Karazian. And even today, Dr. Karazian is one of the leading voices in functional medicine, more on the clinical side. He speaks for the Institute for Functional Medicine. All the doctors at the Cleveland Clinic's Functional Medicine Center is trained through IFM, and Datis is associated with them. So it was through hearing Dr. Karazian speak about this. So for me at that point, when I was in school, was more focused in functional medicine, not just this more broader health and wellness.
This is so good. So, as I mentioned, your new book is fantastic. I mean, fantastic. Intuitive fasting.
Thanks,
and this term, I mean, of course, we're going to dive into what that looks like. But one of the big tenets, and we talk about this here on the show as well, is that we can't eat for someone else's body. We can't eat for somebody else's physical and biological needs.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to really to listen to our own bodies and eat what's right for us. And you teach patients about eating intuitively, right? So first of all, what is intuitive eating? If I'm craving some Cinnamon Toast Crunch, is that my intuition talking to me?
You would think, right? I mean, look, you're catching me at a weird time because the book's out, early days, and you don't know, because I'm in my bubble consulting patients. All of the stuff I write about in my book is just born out of hours and hours, 10 hours a day, seeing patients, seeing their labs improve, seeing their lives improve. It's the most uncontroversial thing in the world. It's positive. Their doctors are telling them, whatever you're doing, keep on doing it. Like, everybody's on the same page. We're good. They're getting healthy. There's nothing bad about that. But apparently, now that the book's out, it's triggering a lot of people because of that title that I gave it, is intuitive fasting. And there's the more conventional intuitive eating community that they have that they think that they own that word intuition. That's not what I'm talking about, because that's talking about people with eating disorders and they're kind of overcoming that. If that's working for them the way that it works for them, great. That's their intuitive eating. What I'm talking about here is, how do we get to a place of knowing what our body needs? How do we get to a place physiologically and mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? How do we get to a place where we know what makes us feel great? Because I'm meeting people that are struggling with hormonal problems, struggling with blood sugar problems, struggling with autoimmune issues. So like you said, like, is it hangriness or is it intuition? Is it insatiable cravings or is it intuition? Like, if you're really going towards something that makes you feel worse, is that really just perpetuating you feeling bad at the end of the day? So I am all for authentic intuitive eating, but you have to have metabolic flexibility or some semblance of it, at least moving in that direction to start to have proper hormonal signaling, proper blood sugar balance, proper satiety signaling. All of that stuff physiologically, that's the infrastructure, that's the fertile foundation for knowing what makes you feel good and knowing what doesn't make you feel good. So that's what I'm talking about, intuitive fasting and with eating intuitively. And I would say this, just like you and I are doing right now, when you're metabolically flexible, you can go longer without eating, not because it's some arduous, obsessive, punitive, like, oh, I'm going to punish myself with fasting.
Right.
This is not an eating disorder disguised as a wellness practice. This is about, I can just go longer without eating because I'm more metabolically flexible. So that is the other part of intuitive fasting.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that it just goes against conventional wisdom, which is programmed into us, into our culture, that you need to be eating constantly throughout the day.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. How has our encouragement to constantly be eating really collided with our genome?
Well, researchers estimate that our genetics haven't changed in around 10,000 years. A long time, no matter however you look at it. It's a long time. Our genetics haven't changed. But yeah, our world has changed so dramatically in such a short, finite period of time. When you're looking at the context of the totality of human history, there's what's known in the research as the genetic-epigenetic mismatch, this chasm between our DNA and the world around us, this living in a brave new world as far as genetics are concerned. And those genetic predispositions for insulin resistance or autoimmunity, they've been lying dormant for 10,000 years, but they're being awoken like never before because of this onslaught of this epigenetic-genetic mismatch. So that's a problem. And the way that we're eating and the amount that we're eating and the type of foods we're eating, all of the how and the when and what of what we're eating is this genetic-epigenetic mismatch largely. So we're constantly eating, we're snacking, we're not giving our body much of a break from repairing and renewing. And it can be as simple as just not eating too late at night and allow your body to fast through the night until you break the fast at breakfast. It could be that. But we can dig even deeper for people that want to explore the lengths that their metabolism can go.
So good. And I love the fact we both do this. We, in my book as well, I kind of go through a little bit of the history of things. And this isn't a new thing. This isn't a new invention. And I love that but it's a new framework. It's a new way of looking at it. Because again, we've been inundated with this idea. I was taught this at my conventional university, also certification programs, eat multiple small meals a day. And we'll talk more about that and some of the science and some of the studies around that. But this is what I was taught for us to be constantly eating. But you talk about Hippocrates, for example, and you kind of go back and you look at some of the historical references and just understanding that this kind of breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, snack paradigm, it's literally just a new invention.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and it is. It's like unsettling for some people to question why, like, can we do something different? And this is all predicated on feeling better. And I just want to maybe reiterate this. If what you're doing is working for you, if you feel great, if your labs look great, if you have a healthy relationship with your body and food, keep doing what you're doing. But there's an epidemic of people that don't feel like that. Right. There's 50 million Americans have an autoimmune disease. Over 50% of the United States is insulin resistant, prediabetes, metabolic issues, PCOS, type 2 diabetes. We need to do something different to see something different. So yeah, we're never giving our gut time to rest, and digesting food requires a lot of energy, as you know, and there's an epidemic of gut problems and people that are not digesting food properly, not breaking it down. We have an epidemic of people that can't even tolerate salads. They're eating raw vegetables and they're getting bloated and digestive problems. There's a problem here. And a lot of it does have to do with the gut never getting a break because of the constant eating and then what we're feeding it too. So fasting, one of the studies that I reference in the book, is a way, and when I say fasting, a specific type of fast that I'm exploring in the book, when you explore in yours as well, is this time-restricted feeding. It's not about caloric restriction. It's just giving your body a bit of a break without eating. And you're eating ample, delicious foods in specific windows. So it's nothing scary. But it's allowing your gut time to reset. Our microbiome has this circadian rhythm, like cortisol has. Certain colonies are higher in the morning, some are higher in the evening. You have this wave-like motion of this microbiome metropolis. And fasting helps to reset that. So that's a powerful thing. And that's when I see people start to have agency over their health again and start reclaiming their health. And I would say when they're more metabolically flexible and their gut's healthier and the inflammation levels are lower, they're in control of their life. They're in control of the food instead of the food being in control of them.
That's powerful, man. So let's just clear this part up right here. So you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is not punishing yourself and starving yourself when you say I'm fasting. This is not a self-punishment. How is intermittent fasting, intuitive fasting, different from chronic calorie restriction?
Chronic caloric restriction will over time slow your metabolism down and you'll feel miserable. And that's why most diets fail, because it's like that analogy that we use in our space. When you're in the sugar burning mode, you're burning kindling on the fire. The kindling will create some light, but it will be short lived. So you have to keep putting kindling on throughout the day. So what caloric restriction is and what dieting culture is, it's basically taking that kindling down and then saying, live that way. And most people will do it for a little bit, but it fails most people most of the time. And they'll lose a little bit of weight, but over time it'll be short-lived. It's not sustainable for most people. There's a place for slight caloric deficit, don't get me wrong, and that can happen with some fasting. But that's not the main goal of it. It's a component of it, but calories are not king. And like I mentioned in our book, our body is more of a chemistry lab and less of a calculator. So right. The foods we eat actually influence our biochemistry, influence the gut microbiome. It's actually, it's a communication to our physiology. Because 1,000 calories of avocados is going to influence our body completely different than 1,000 calories of a soda or something like that. So it's using food as medicine strategically, but definitely not chronic caloric restriction. And people conflate the two because there's studies that show there's certain fasting mimicking ways of eating, and though even those are finite. Even those are temporary. We're not chronically lower in calories. There's a time for feeding and a time for fasting. And people like to make broad sweeping, overgeneralized statements and misrepresent what we're talking about when it comes to fasting.
Yeah. So now let's clear this up as well. So I was taught that, and this is one of the craziest things, and this was at a fitness training, so this was like a certification, strength and conditioning coach thing, while I was still at my university. I was trying to diversify because, again, what I was learning in school just wasn't measuring up. And the trainer, she said that if you don't eat breakfast, your metabolism isn't on. Like, you got to eat to keep your metabolism going, right? So I want to ask you, shouldn't we be eating more times throughout the day? You've got some studies actually where they have folks to consume multiple meals versus just maybe 2 larger meals and see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is an interesting field of research. And I think when that advice of having 6 small meals a day or your metabolism is going to slow down, look, if you're in a kindling, burning mode, that can be relatively true because you're addicted to kindling. Your blood sugar is going to be on a roller coaster if it's dependent on just kindling. So relatively, there's probably some truth to that. But if your only option is kindling, that's true. But you can put a log on the fire. You can be fat adapted, and there's a time and place for kindling too. So what I'm advocating for is just putting another fuel source on the fire here for a more abundant, more sustainable, more long-lasting energy throughout the day. So, yeah, if you're on a blood sugar roller coaster, you probably need kindling throughout the day. But there's another option.
Yeah. One of those, and I specifically wrote this down because it was so eye-opening. It was a randomized controlled trial you talked about. They took 2 groups of diabetic patients. One group was eating 5 to 6 small meals per day, and the second group ate 2 large meals per day. Both groups were consuming the same, this is the key word, it's the same amount of calories. But at the end of the study, the group who ate 2 larger meals per day lost more weight, lost more hepatic fat, had a better improvement in insulin sensitivity, and more. Unbelievable.
Radical to some, right? Radical. But isn't it amazing how resilient the body is? If you just allow it time to repair and renew and upregulate these pathways that our body's capacity for healing has, it's profoundly exciting. I mean, it's so cool to see. And I have no doubt in another 10 years, there's going to be even cooler studies coming out showing what the body's capable of doing. I mean, this, like you said, Hippocrates, Paracelsus, I quote Paracelsus in the book. He's another father of modern medicine, also used fasting just like Hippocrates. He was known as the father of toxicology and the Martin Luther of medicine because he was reforming medicine at that time. And he called fasting the physician within, which I think is a powerful, eloquent summary of like all the cool studies that are substantiating that now, is that they didn't have randomized controlled trials thousands of years ago, but they saw anecdotally people getting better and healthier. And that's why they're the fathers of modern medicine and not me, because they knew without studies, they saw changes in people's health.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Whenever we talk about Hippocrates and how many principles, like that, you take the Hippocratic Oath, but how many principles are actually in play from this person who is like the framework for the system, like all diseases begin in the gut. It's another thing that we hear coming from the father of modern medicine. So I want to talk about, which we've been alluding to this, there are some very specific benefits that we see that folks can be, and again, I love that you mentioned this too. It's okay if you are eating 6, 7, 8 small meals a day. And by the way, I've done all of this stuff. And you are feeling good and you're getting results. But the thing is, anything can work for somebody temporarily. Right. So you might even be in a space right now, especially when people are most passionate about something when it's working for them in the moment. But especially once it becomes integrated. First of all, most folks find that they have to pivot with different things. And over time, especially if you know something works for you, you're just content with it. But the people who get adamant and want to, debate and argue about it, generally it's just that hot thing for them. So I'm saying this to say that folks could be missing out on some benefits, because when you stop eating, certain processes kick into gear, certain benefits start happening that you might be missing out on if you're constantly eating throughout the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is about, if you want to take your health to the next level, if you're feeling intuitively something's off here, then lean into these things, pick it up, experiment with it. And what you said is so true. If I hung my hat on one way to do something all day long when I'm consulting patients, I'd be proven wrong all day long. So these are tools that I want people to grow for themselves. And after cycling through like 2 or 3 of the protocol in the book, they're going to be able to adjust it for themselves. Oh, I felt better when I did more of this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do less of that. I don't need that. That's the heart of functional medicine. It's bio-individuality. We're all created differently. So the idea that everyone has to do this one type of fast, maybe 12-12 is all you need. And like you said, what works for you now isn't necessarily what you're going to need down the line. And it's okay to pivot. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to evolve. That shouldn't be feared, and that shouldn't be shamed either.
Oh yeah, so good. So specifically, you talk about, and this for me was a thing, 15, 20 years ago that really got me to consider this in a new light, which is digestion itself requires an immense amount of energy. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And if I could predicate this again on something I touched on earlier, is that there is an epidemic of gut problems, but it exists on a spectrum. So if someone's gut is super healthy, they could probably get away with eating the modern Western diet if it's more or less healthy, if they're following the 80-20 rule maybe, and they're going to get away with it. People are getting away with less and less. The resilience capacity of the human health across the board in the West is going down. So maybe our grandparents could have got away with different stuff. People are not having the resilience that we once had.
Right.
Because it's that mug analogy. Some people have massive mugs, some people have smaller mugs. That's your genetic tolerance to stressors. And you can't change your mug size, but you can change what you put in it. The problem is their mugs are overflowing sooner and sooner and sooner and sooner. So gut health is at the center of a lot of this. There's a lot of gut-centric components to people's chronic inflammatory problems. So to start to allow that mug to empty, to start to decrease that tipping point that people are finding themselves in the throes of inflammatory flares, in the throes of chronic health problems, in the throes of feeling out of control in their own body when it comes to health, you need to empty that mug. And dealing with the gut and giving the gut some TLC is at the heart of a lot of the principles within what we're talking about. It's the gut component there.
Yeah. So looking at health in a very superficial way, we're taught that food is energy, calories are energy. This is how you get more energy. But again, we're looking at the body as a calculator and not a chemistry lab, which is we're looking at food in a way, again, we're getting energy from food, but the greatest energy requirement for the human body is digesting the food that we eat. So much energy goes towards that. And a part of this is the immune response, right? Most of your immune system is located in your gut, and it has to be there front line, because through our evolution, you could eat something random and it could be the last thing you ever eat, So your immune system has to be front line. And plus, and this is the biggest part, it's the most miraculous thing where you're eating something and it's going to get turned into human tissue. It's like freaking magic. It's like some David Copperfield, like jumping out of the closet.
Yeah.
Craziness that the human body is able to do, but that requires a massive focus of energy.
Yeah.
And when that energy is getting siphoned, it's getting pulled away from other things, repair and some of these other things I want to talk to you about.
Yeah,
so
well said.
Really want to talk more about metabolic flexibility that you highlight in the book, which is super eye-opening. One of our goals with intuitive fasting is to return our bodies to a natural state of metabolic flexibility. So let's talk about what metabolic flexibility is and mitochondrial indecision.
Yeah. All right. So many people are finding themselves in a lack of metabolic flexibility. They're stuck in that sugar burning mode. They're bound by the next meal. Like the amount of bandwidth that the next meal and the next snack and the next craving it's taking up a lot of their headspace up throughout the day. And even when they eat food, they don't really feel fulfilled for long, and they can feel fatigued and lethargic afterwards. These are some of the hallmarks of metabolic rigidity or metabolic inflexibility. We all are born as babies producing ketones for proper neural development. It's something that humans would have been in times of ketosis for eons. So when people talk about this stuff being a fad, I mean, what we're doing right now in modern life is the fad. We're just returning something that people talked about for thousands of years. And it's now substantiated in science too. So it's our birthright. We're metabolic flexibility is our birthright. We're just returning to that birthright. That's all. And that, to me, when someone has metabolic flexibility, they have a log on the fire, fat for fuel, they have the kindling on the fire when they want it and when they need it. That's the best light. That's the best energy to fuel your day. There's no shame in either one of those. The problem is people feel like I'm advocating for people to always be in ketosis or to always be fasting. No, these are tools to pick up to better your life. And intuitive fasting will just happen as you gain metabolic flexibility, because you can go longer without eating. And like one day I'll wake up, I feel great. I know I feel great when I do some fasting and time restricted feeding. I'm consulting patients in the morning online, and I'll break my fast at lunch. And then the next day, maybe it's a Saturday morning, I want to have a breakfast. There should be that grace and lightness to this. It shouldn't be this punitive thing. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what you talk about. This is our message when it comes to this. This is a tool to better your life. We're not like, you can't eat, and if you eat, you're bad. I mean, this is completely a misrepresentation of our message. So metabolic flexibility is this awesome place where you have food peace. You have like an inner stillness of knowing, I feel great, and I eat when I want, and I don't eat when I don't want, because I feel great where I'm at. And there's just this in-tuned awareness of what your body needs at any given moment.
Yeah. And this, when you talk about utilizing different fuels, this is literally, the heart of this is the mitochondria.
Oh, yes.
And being able to utilize the different fuels.
Absolutely. Yeah. So mitochondrial indecision. Many people find themselves, I call it in the book, and that's how I've been calling it for years, is metabolic purgatory, where you're kind of not fully fat adapted, you're not fully sugar adapted, you got the kindling off the fire because you're trying to diet, and you're like, that's diet culture. That's like the toxic diet culture of failing and filling yourself with shame because you can't stick with it. Yeah, because you were dependent on kindling. So mitochondrial, we need to train our mitochondria over time to build the proper infrastructure to start burning fat for fuel. That takes time. So the analogy that I use in the book is this sort of proverbial yoga class for your metabolism. Look, I don't do yoga that much, so I'm just giving myself as an example, and I'm not very flexible either. So if I showed up to yoga, even if it's a beginner class, I'm going to be like, what the heck? The human body should not move like this. I'm horrible about it. And I could even judge yoga and say, yoga is not for me. But no, it's something new. And I'm musculoskeletally, I am inflexible. Many people's metabolism is inflexible. So it's just about being consistent and gaining that flexibility. And part of that is the mitochondrial ability to burn fat for fuel.
Oh, wow. So we want to get our mitochondria to be able to do downward dog.
Yeah.
Basically.
Hold that warrior too.
Hold that warrior. I love that so much, because essentially what happens we create these kind of metabolic clogs with the way that we eat, especially the type of food that we're eating. As you mentioned a couple of times, just the very nature of the things that we are exposing ourselves to. That's the fad. Smurf cereal that I grew up on, which was my favorite, that's a fad, Even though it looks like Doritos have been around a long time, it's a fad. These are new things, but creating these metabolic blocks where your mitochondria don't really even know how to utilize different fuels, and creating that stagnation that you were just mentioning.
100%. But it's an aha moment for people once they're on the other side of it. It makes complete sense. But I get it when what we're talking about here is turning everything on its head as far as what they knew. And they don't even, just because something's there every day, they think that's normal. And many people settle for just feeling lousy, different degrees of lousy. And like you said, it's like that maybe something's working for them now, and that's the only truth for them. But the reality is, not everybody's wellness path has to look exactly the same. And yeah, this is the tool to improve your quality of life.
Yeah. Let's talk about how our microbiome plays into metabolic flexibility. Like, how does our microbiome play into this whole equation of intuitive eating and fasting?
Yeah. So I see on an hourly basis the microbiome labs. I look at poop all day long. not literally look
Poop
at poop.
looker.
It's so normal for me to talk about poop. I don't realize when I'm talking to like mixed company, it's really not normal to talk about feces. But the amount of dysbiosis, the amount of bacterial overgrowth, the amount of these weeds that are overgrowing in this gut garden. There's nothing inherently wrong with weeds. They're part of nature, but people are having a weed overgrowth. They're having pathogenic and opportunistic bacteria overgrowing because this genetic-epigenetic mismatch. This microbiome would have lived with us for a long time too. And they're also living in a brave new world, just like our genetics. So upwards of, depending on the study that you look at, but upwards of 100 trillion bacteria in our gut and in our skin. And we have about 10 trillion human cells. So we're about 10 times more bacteria than human. And the microbiome influences so much of our life. 95% of serotonin, these are things that probably your audience already knows, but most of serotonin is made in the gut, stored in the gut. It's known as the second brain, which you talk about. So the reality is this, an insult to the gut is an insult to the rest of your body. And dysbiosis, and this is the thing, people think they have to have extreme digestive symptoms to have underlying gut components to their issues. Like they're like, okay, I go to the bathroom, fine, right? I don't have IBS, I don't have constipation, and that's not necessarily the only thing that's going on. If you look at the studies that are coming out, that underlying bacterial imbalances are associated with metabolic issues. They're associated with brain health issues. They're associated with autoimmune issues. And they go to the bathroom more or less okay. But then there is a larger conversation about what is normal as far as bowel movements anyways, because you patients, they don't really like to talk about it that much, but then they'll say, I don't have any digestive problems. But then they'll tell you, no, I go every 3 days. But they're like, I'm not constipated.
Yeah.
Or like, it's looser stools every day on the Bristol chart. And they're like, yeah, it's normal because it's there every day. Just because something's common doesn't necessarily mean it's normal. And settling for these gray areas that are, from a functional medicine standpoint, check engine lights. You may think it's normal, but actually it's not. So what's normal for bowel movements is 1 to 2 snakes a day, as we say. But that's a good Bristol chart way of guessing where you're at. But again, you can have normal Bristol chart and still have a gut problem too.
Wow. So how is our microbiome
Yeah.
potentially influencing our ability to, manage our hunger, manage our ability to fast?
Wow. So it's these microbiome cities, these colony forming units, they're all like neighborhoods within this microbiome metropolis. And certain colonies of bacteria, especially the overgrowths, the SIBOs, the dysbiosis, the SIFOs, the small intestinal fungal overgrowths, they determine a lot of how your brain works. They determine how blood sugar is regulated. They determine how hormones are converted. So if your blood sugar is being influenced by this, if your neurotransmitters are influenced by this, if your inflammation levels are being influenced by this, that's going to influence what you crave. It's going to influence how you relate to the world around you, food being a part of that. So your relationship with the world around you will be influenced with an unhealthy gut. And food's a part of that. Cravings are part of that.
Wow. So it's not necessarily my intuition that's craving the Cinnamon Toast Crunch. It's very likely microbes.
Absolutely. That's a component of it because you have to look at the cascade, the ripple effect. So yeah, it's blood sugar imbalance, but then can we go upstream from there? Oftentimes we can. And the scientific journals are exploring that too. What's upstream from blood sugar imbalance? Oftentimes there's gut components to this, but it's oftentimes a confluence of factors that is the perfect storm, where the gut's a major component of it for many people, but it's not the entire component of it. But that's a good thing because we have to understand all the pieces of the puzzle. Because on the flip side of that, I see some people that have focused so much on gut health, they without a doubt are way better than they used to be. And they know that. Their health's improved. And that's typically where I'm meeting most of my patients. They've got their gut in check. They're a lot better, but they're still struggling. And that's when we can find with labs some things that maybe get missed, that need some next level support.
Yeah. Now, you've also written a book on this subject that I'm about to bring up. And it's so important because even in our field, and of course with the public at large, this term can seem a little bit like it's a ghost or like it's not really real. Inflammation. How is inflammation playing into our ability to have metabolic flexibility and just the overarching health issues associated?
Yeah, man, it is a nebulous term for many people. Like they know inflammation is probably not good, but they don't really know the implications in real life. And I mean, all of the things that I've written, like with ketotarian and then with inflammation spectrum and this, I've talked about fasting in all three of the books because it's part of my clinical work. And specifically with intermittent fasting, it supports beta-hydroxybutyrate, which lowers inflammation. So that's why I talked about, in passing, I talked about fasting in inflammation spectrum. So inflammation is the commonality between just about every health problem. So we're talking about autoimmune conditions to diabetes, metabolic issues, inflammatory problems in the muscles and joints, arthritis. All of these are inflammatory issues.
But what is it? It sounds like a boogeyman. It sounds like Candyman. Like you say inflammation 3 times and it shows up. What is it?
It's actually a product of the immune system. So it's actually not a bad thing. It's not inherently bad at all. It's in balance. Inflammation fights viruses and fights bacteria and heals wounds and protects us. The problem is when there's an insult and when there's an assault against the Goldilocks principle, right? Not too high, not too low, but just right. And that's so much of our body, isn't it, right? Like the microbiome, we just were talking about that. You don't want dysbiosis, bacterial overgrowth. You don't want deficiencies of bacteria either. Same with hormones. You don't want dominance of hormones. You don't want deficiencies either. Inflammation, same thing, same principle. You want inflammation just right when you need it. You want it to be high at certain times when it's fighting something off, and you want it to calm back down. The problem is, and what we are typically referring to when we in health people are in the health world, when we're talking about inflammation, we're meaning chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is that lack of balance, that sort of forest fire that's burning in perpetuity that is associated with just about every health problem under the sun, even brain health issues. And that's what people don't make the connection oftentimes. They think, oh, it's a mental health issue. Mental health is not separate from physical health. Mental health is physical health. Our brain is part of our body, and there's a whole field of research exploring it, which you've talked about and I've talked about, is this neuroinflammatory component of it. That when we're looking at the cytokine model of cognitive function, how cytokines or pro-inflammatory cells are attacking the brain or upregulated against the brain, which things like anxiety and depression and fatigue and brain fog are all associated with. This is all inflammation. It's immune system gone awry.
Man, yeah, neuroinflammation is one of the biggest issues in our culture. But the thing is, of course, it's one of those things where the brain doesn't have pain receptors, so you don't really know that your brain is on fire. And I love the analogy you give in the book of like the human body experiencing its own global warming, basically. And it oftentimes we find out too late, and we have downstream effects, but it's really rooted in this inflammation taking place in our brain. Now, I want to talk about, and I think this is so important just to bring some more practicality to things too, some of the benefits, some of the specific benefits of intuitive fasting. And you go through 5 of them in the book. I want to talk about a couple of them.
Yeah.
The first one being ketosis.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So that's part of the log on the fire, right? I mean, that is what's known in the research as the 4th macronutrient. So we have protein, fats, carbs, and ketone bodies that, again, babies are all producing them when they're born. We can all produce them. They are naturally produced in the body. And so endogenous ketone bodies is something that's one of the hallmark benefits of intermittent fasting and a clean ketogenic diet, which mimics fasting in many ways. And if you look at the research, obviously you look at the research, but for people that are curious about this, is that if you look at the pathways of the ketogenic diet and fasting, you'll see a lot of the same things because beta-hydroxybutyrate is at the heart of a lot of that research. So it's not just a way to burn fat, it's a way to fuel your body. And it's not just a way to burn fat, it's an epigenetic modulator. It's a signaling molecule to actually downregulate and basically manage really cool pathways in the body. So it downregulates these pro-inflammatory pathways like we just were talking about, this chronic inflammatory state. Well, this is a natural, completely free way to lower inflammation levels. So things like NF-kappa B, the NLRP3 inflammasome, these pro-inflammatory pathways are lowered naturally in this state. And we can upregulate these pro-antioxidant, anti-inflammatory pathways like NRF2 pathway, the AMPK pathway. So it's a regulator of inflammation. And it increases mitochondrial biogenesis. We were talking mitochondria, actually making more resilient mitochondria. It increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, actually encouraging neuroplasticity and making new neurons. I mean, I keep thinking of Paracelsus, the physician within. I'm like, that dude was right. Right. He was right. Wow. He didn't know all this stuff we know now. It was a physician within. And autophagy with cellular recycling, that's just ketosis. So that was one of the 5 in that chapter.
Yeah. Oh, so good. And even just mentioning, because that's the thing, is like actually connecting all of those benefits with what's happening, which is your body shifting over into ketosis, which again, this would be something through our evolution that would more than likely happen on a daily basis. But today, most folks never touch that. Right. And so they don't see the uptick in the production of HGH. They don't see the uptick in the production of BDNF, like you just mentioned. But also, man, it's just, there's so many cool benefits. One of the last ones you just mentioned is another one of the 5 you kind of target and dig deeper on, which is autophagy. Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Right. Which it's connected to ketosis, but I see it as its own separate thing because of the power that it has on our health. We all have autophagy. If you break that word down, autophagy, it's autophagy, eating. It's our healthy cells gobbling up and recycling dysfunctional cells. So it's our body's innate house cleaning system. And we all have it to a certain degree, but because of this genetic-epigenetic mismatch, autophagy is not working so hard. So we need to support that by decreasing that mismatch, by decreasing that chasm. So this evolutionary mismatch that you mentioned is one of the reasons why researchers are exploring why autophagy even needs supported in that way. Fasting is one of many tools that researchers are exploring on how to support autophagy. So it excites me for my patients that are struggling with chronic inflammatory problems as a tool to improve their health.
That's so powerful. And I love that you said this multiple times, the physician within creating, we've got the most powerful pharmacy in our body, and all of these different things that, man, you cannot get a pill for. Your body just does when you allow it to. So empowering, man. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, which this is the thing about your book, is that you really spend time outlining the plan to get people to the place of intuitive fasting, intuitive eating, which again, it would sound like a very, not a conventional term. We'll just put it like that. But that's really ultimately where we want to get, where we can actually listen to our body, listen to the physician within. Because what we're eating, the way that we're eating, oftentimes we're programmed to eat like somebody else, to eat for what somebody else's needs are. But once we really dial that in and listen to our own bodies, that's when the magic happens. So can you talk a little bit about the plan that you've outlined in the book? Yeah,
man, thanks for touching on that. Because I think it is a paradox on one end of it, intuitive fasting. When someone's in sugar-burning, hangry mode, addicted to food, fasting will not be intuitive. I agree with that. But what I'm saying is, just like that yoga class, you're not flexible. You need to become flexible so you can have strength and resilience and flexibility and intuition. So I'm right there with you. It's not intuitive to you. But by using these tools, you can gain metabolic flexibility, which, just like with yoga, you'll gain strength, you'll gain resilience, you'll gain a rootedness in your body. You will be able to, because that fat is the log is on the fire, you are keto adapted or fat adapted, you can go longer without eating. So it is this yoga class where we're stretching and contracting the metabolism over 4 weeks. And you and I both know this, but like, it's not done after 4 weeks. I want you to cycle through these 4 weeks as many times as you need to, because this is a template to gain metabolic flexibility. So week 1 is a 12-12 fasting to eating window. These are all types of TRFs, time restricted feeding windows. So they're very moderate, approachable, accessible forms of fasting light in a way. We're not talking about multiple day water fast or dry fast. They have their place with doctor supervision and for when it's clinically appropriate. But this is something that you don't need a doctor for necessarily. Most people can do this by themselves. So 12-12 is, I think, so underappreciated, right? You know what I mean? It's like the fasting, the fasting, militant fasting people will be like, that's weak. That's weak. Like, why are you even saying that? But they have to understand most people are not where they're at. Like, we have to lean these people in and help them out where they're at and be there for them in the way that they need at this point. So 12-12, I think most people just can start there.
And the data shows that just after 12 hours, you start getting a lot of these benefits start happening.
Yes.
So, it's definitely touching that, which is 12-12 is what specifically?
So you have 24 hours in the day. If they've learned nothing in this conversation, that's the first thing they'll learn, 24 hours a day. 12-12 is you have a 12 hour of eating, 12 hours of fasting. So 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Have it work with your schedule. The goal of it mainly is to not eat too late at night and allow 12 hours to your body to fast. Which includes your sleep time. Which includes sleep. People, I think, get confused on that all the time. But yeah, absolutely. Sleep is part of that. That's week 1. But I'm pairing that with ketotarian, which is complementing that time-restricted feeding window because it's fasting mimicking in many ways because it's high fat, moderate protein, low carb. We're supporting that mTOR pathway or keeping it modulated to support these fat adapted, let's get some mitochondria, getting it less indecisive over that week 1. It's leaning into it. We're leaning into it. It's a gentle leaning in. And like I say in the book, meet your body where you're at. Start checking in with your body now. Even though you probably won't be fully intuitive, check in with your body. Maybe you need to do week 1 2 weeks. Maybe you need to do it 3 weeks. That's all right. Because I want this to be sustainable for you. And maybe week 2, going right into week 2 in week 2 is too much for you. But many people are going to do fine with going into week 2 as it is, which is why I made it week 2. But it is a 14 to 18 hour fasting window. So it's, depending on how you do it, let's just use 18 hour as an example. You have about a 6 hour eating window. So you can move that 6 hours whenever you want. And you're fasting 18 hours, sleep included. That's the metabolic recharge fast. We're working on cardiometabolic markers, decreasing insulin resistance, increasing more fat adaptation, and decreasing inflammation levels. And week 3 is the deepest fast. It's the cellular renewal fast. That's where I talk about the research about sirtuins and longevity and stem cells and autophagy. And it's the almost OMAD fast, but it's every other day. So it's not too scary, guys. But it's a 20 to 22 hour fasting window. So I call it almost OMAD because there's a study in that book that I talk about, that PKR pathway, where there's studies that show getting all your calories in like a 1 hour period. I know a lot of people in the OMAD world do fine with that, and I'm not shaming anybody who wants to do OMAD. But I'm saying a lot of times people that aren't metabolically flexible and they're jumping right into an OMAD, it's a lot of calories get in a short period of time. So doing a looser, more flexible, almost OMAD approach that I talk about in the book allows for a bigger eating window. Because remember, this isn't about caloric restriction. You're still getting your meals in. So it's not increasing that PKR pathway, the metaflammation, and it's a little bit more approachable for people. So this deeper fast is deeper ketosis. So we're supporting those longevity pathways, decreasing inflammation, supporting autophagy. And then week 4, maybe I should go back to week 3. Week 3, it's non-consecutive too. I know I said that, but just to repeat that, we're doing almost OMAD 12-12, almost OMAD 12-12. So that diet, I should say it this way, not a diet variability, but eating window variability. The fasting and refeeding days are really important there. That's the Warrior 2 week. That's like, all right, I'm gaining resilience. I'm going to hold this. And then week 4, you're loosening back up. It's 12-12. We're increasing clean carbohydrates. We're getting that kindling on the fire. And it's like that shavasana at the end of yoga class. You're like, dang, I did that. And that cycle is building that fortitude on a metabolic level. And people can adjust it accordingly. I mean, I brought tons of tweaks throughout that whole protocol because I've heard just about every excuse in the book consulting patients. It's like, oh, I need to do this. Okay, adjust it here. So women around their cycle or personal preference, you can adjust it accordingly. Because as you calm this noise of imbalance, you'll be able to hear that still small voice of your intuition. It will become innate as you get grounded in your body.
Incredible. Will, this has been fantastic and super beneficial. I'm so grateful that you put a tool together like this.
Thanks, man.
And just outlined it in such a clear way. Can you let everybody know where they can pick up their book, obviously, and also where they can just follow you online and get more information?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. On Instagram at Dr. Will Cole. drwillcole.com if you want to learn more about my clinical practice, and intuitive fasting's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, support independent bookstores. Yeah, all that stuff.
Awesome, man. You know, one of the big things, before I let you go, I love this. In the book you said, quote, in short, you can, because this is the thing, we oftentimes are thinking about, I want to get healthy, so I'm going to lose weight. And you say this in the book, you say, quote, in short, you can get healthy so that you can lose weight instead of trying to lose weight to get healthy. Can you talk about why you wrote that?
Yeah. People, there's a lot of shame when it comes to weight loss, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And a lot of times people think their main objective is just to lose weight. I hear it all the time with patients and even people on social media. They think if I just lose weight, like all my health problems will go away. And there's a part of that that's true because the body's all interconnected and fat can be inflammatory. I get that point. But I'll tell you this, when your focus is on getting healthy, sustainable weight loss will be a natural byproduct of that. When you're dealing with the underlying impediments that's making weight loss so difficult, it'll just be an outflow of that. So that's what I see time and time again is when we deal with the things like the inflammation or the gut issues or the insulin resistance or the estrogen dominance or the whatever we're talking about, when you deal with that and start tapping into that physician within, weight loss becomes a natural byproduct of that.
Awesome. Powerful. Dr. Will Cole,
Thanks, man.
everybody.
Appreciate it.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today.
I just do detective work and say, okay, what are these external forces, many of which are food, and many of which are the products we've made